When we did our video on Anthony Burgess's book, The Wanting Seed, we talked about how he was upset about the fact that A Clockwork Orange was the only book he was known for. The opposite is true with Joseph Heller.
When a journalist asked him why he never wrote a book as good as Catch-22 again, his answer was, who else has?
But even if his other books might not be as successful as Catch-22, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not worth looking at.
So today we're looking at Picture This, a novel he wrote in 1988 about Rembrandt and his painting of Aristotle.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Eric.
And this is In Other Words.
So picture this. Rembrandt is working on his painting, and as he fills in the details of Aristotle, Aristotle becomes conscious.
Sounds like it'd be a really, really interesting, cool book. You know, a book written from the POV of a sentient painting.
Yeah.
And there is elements of that. But what this ends up being is not really a novel at all.
No, it's almost a history book, but not about any one particular subject.
Yeah.
Just sort of a scattershot look at the history of humanity, mostly European humans.
And you'd think, you know, with the subject of the painting being Aristotle, when it's focusing on Greek history and all that sort of stuff, you'd think Aristotle would be the main subject that it focuses on, but no, that would not be the case.
He kind of wants to talk about Aristotle's background, and Aristotle was a student of Plato, who was a student of Socrates.
And so Socrates ends up being kind of the main focus.
Yes, we get a lot of Socrates. We get his some of his life, how he interacted with other people. We get his trial, his death. It's all pretty interesting.
Yeah, just because the book isn't really a novel and it reads in some ways more like a nonfiction doesn't mean it isn't an interesting read or that it's not a good book, even if it's messy and not, focused.
There's something I just want to read on the back of this book. Picture This does for the universe of art and museums what Catch-22 did for war, and that's Connoisseur magazine. I kind of think that quote is way off base.
Yeah, what the hell is it talking
I don't
about?
think there is, as towards the end, there is some information about art, but I would say this book does for war what Catch-22 did for war. I mean, it's not just, but a lot of this is about the futility of war, about humanity not learning its lessons and engaging in war over and over again. Because we focus on the life of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and we find out about all the wars that Athens was engaged in over that time.
Mostly with Sparta.
Or go to war with a city that was allied with Sparta because they weren't at war with Sparta at that time, just to provoke Sparta. But we don't get into like the wars at a human level. We just see it as like an overall folly.
I don't know if I necessarily read into it but I'm considering what Catch-22 is, that'd make a ton of sense if that's what he was going for. It just kind of felt more like a history lesson to me.
I actually have a paragraph that I want to read to you from near the end of the book that I think is a really good demonstration about how much of this book is about war. Aristotle was on display in London, having survived miraculously the First Northern War, the Second Northern War, the War of Devolution, the War of Grand Alliance, the War of the Spanish Succession,
the War of the Polish Succession, the War of the Austrian Succession, the Seven Years' War, the First Silesian War, the Second Silesian War, the War of the Bavarian Succession, the Russo-Turkish War, the French Revolution, the Turkish-Polish War, the Swedish-Danish War, the Swedish-Russian War, the Franco-Austrian-Prussian War, the War of the First Coalition against France, the French-Dutch War, Napoleon's Italian Campaign, the British-Spanish War, Napoleon's Egyptian Campaign, the War of the Second Coalition against France, the Rebellion of the United Irishmen against Britain, another British-Spanish War, the Russian-Persian War, the War of the Third Coalition against France, the Prussian-French War, the French-Portuguese War, Napoleon's triumphal invasion of Russia and disastrous retreat, the Conquest of Vienna, and the Battle of Waterloo.
That was a lot of words.
It sure was.
No, I do definitely remember that paragraph and just being like, yeah, that's a lot of wars.
Yeah.
Like, geez, this is going to be a lot to read through. Okay, you know what? Time to power through this. It's like over the course of a few thousand years almost of history being talked about. Well, not really, because it's kind of 300 BC, 1600s, and then some 1900s stuff.
Yeah.
And it will swap between these three time periods, like on the fly, like in the middle of a chapter.
And that's one of the things where I think like there are parts where it's talking about Athens being at war and Aristotle thinking about that. And then we come out to Rembrandt painting the painting and we hear about there's a war between the Dutch and the British. And then we get into Aristotle's perspective and then suddenly we're back in Athens and there's another war that Athens is fighting with Sparta. And they're both kind of talked about almost like one after the other, and it just keeps showing that humanity keeps repeating its own mistakes. I would say almost like the whole point of this novel is that cliche that the more things change, the more they stay the same.
I don't know, because like when we're focusing on Rembrandt's life and all of that stuff, I mean, it definitely mentions the Dutch and British at war, but it's like kind of just a footnote of that part of the story and not really something that's focused on. Whereas when the Athens stuff, like the wars, is like way more of a major focus on that element.
I think you're right, but I think there are points where he draws them together just to show that folly of humanity that we can't seem to learn our lessons.
And you were saying that it got some history wrong-ish. Not really wrong, but it's just not really saying the full truth of the story to accentuate that point with the World War II stuff it started mentioning.
So there's a part in there where he talks about how Hitler was elected with 99% of the vote, and it's like a one line. And my first thought was, well, that's not true. I know that Hitler won a minority government. And then so I did some research and found out that like after Hitler had a coup d'etat, after they'd won the minority government, they had a second election where the only people you could vote for were Nazis. So, and it was not a secret ballot either. So obviously they won that one by 99%. I don't think that's Heller being unfair to the German population. I think it's a comment that's obviously wrong or at least deceptive about history, because a lot of this book, I think, is also, as much as he's talking about history in it, you don't know how much you can actually trust any of it, and you don't really know how much you can trust history.
Because I mean, it does talk about like everything we know about Socrates is basically through the writings of Plato, because Socrates, for some weird reason, thought writing was stupid and like you were a dumb person if you write, because you can't keep track of things in your head. So what, you're writing?
I mean, there are some people who have even suggested that Socrates didn't really exist and was just like a figure that Plato created to communicate his philosophies.
One thing it talks about specifically in Picture This, the execution of Socrates, talks about how Plato like says in his writings that he was there, and it's presumed that it was true that he was there because Plato had a rival who, if Plato wasn't actually there, would have used that as like an opportunity to call him out on it and defame him. Yeah.
And that's one of those ways that, you know, you have to read history, is like, if someone has an opportunity to say something bad about someone, they will. So if you don't find that, then maybe that part's true. There's a lot of things that I wonder how much we can rely on, even at the end of the whole story, where we've been reading this book about Rembrandt painting the painting. At the very end of the book, there's a line that maybe Rembrandt didn't paint this and this was actually a forgery by one of his students.
Yeah.
And it's just like, so everything you've written
can just be thrown out.
Yeah. And that's like part of trying to learn history, is you can never be 100% sure of anything. And I think there's a thing in this book too where, like, as much as Rembrandt is a character in this, he is presented as someone who, as talented as he is about art, all he really seems to care about is money. Only 7 letters of Rembrandt survived. They're all letters where he's writing about money. So he's built the character of Rembrandt as being someone who's just obsessed with money. Records show that he wasn't good with money, and that he spent too much of it, and he did go bankrupt. So that stuff is true. But who knows what else he might have written on different subjects that just didn't survive. I don't think Heller ever comes out and says, you can't trust history.
Yeah.
But he really just lays the clues out for you.
Yeah.
One of the things about this painting was when it was finally sold to a museum.
Oh yeah, what was it, like the first painting to like started at its bid at $1 million
and sold for more than 2?
Yeah, and it was like the most expensive
painting ever at the time.
Yeah,
there's a great bit where when it's first being hung in the museum, and there are people lining up to see it, Aristotle is like just basking in the attention.
Yeah,
he's loving how much attention he's getting, and then later on when he just sort of becomes a regular painting, how disappointed he is that people don't even look twice at him anymore.
You know, speaking of which, that's another, because that also reflects on some of the other things, which is really interesting. Because one thing about Aristotle is that, as like important as he kind of is for history, scientific discovery and arts and everything, he was in a lot of ways kind of just wrong about everything. So like there's like a bit where, because of the sentence of the painting, where it's like reflecting on how his stuff he said was like used to be taken as absolute truth, how little by little it all just got proven wrong and wrong and wrong, and how he feels about like becoming less important.
I've never read Aristotle.
I have read some Aristotle, and it's really funny because the thing I specifically had read was I had to read Poetics for a screenwriting class, and when I read it, I was like, this advice is really bad. Like, this is not good writing advice at all. And it's funny because when Aristotle's thinking about Poetics specifically, he's like, oh, this was garbage. Like, apparently Aristotle didn't actually complete Poetics, and it's like, the book says they completely changed his opinion on basically everything about it. I'm wondering if Heller maybe had read it too and agreed with me.
That's certainly possible. But that's one of those things where, like, I know about Aristotle through reputation and dismissed him as being this philosopher who got everything wrong. Mm-hmm. But I think, even though I haven't read this stuff now, like the way Heller talks about him and the way he thought about things, even though his conclusions were wrong, his thought processes, I thought, sounded interesting, and I kind of felt like I got more respect for him.
What do you think, though, also about the fact of just what the painting is in general? Just Aristotle pondering on a bust of Homer, and it's like Aristotle didn't really care about Homer.
It's Aristotle dressed in clothing that's contemporary to Rembrandt.
Yeah.
Looking at a bust of Homer that is definitely an ancient Greek style sculpture of Homer.
And so Aristotle is like, as the painting's like, this is not what I remember myself looking like.
And there's a bit in there too where Rembrandt has a bust of Aristotle, but he has this guy who he uses as a model come in, and he's basing his painting of Aristotle on the model instead of using the bust as like a guide for the face.
And the model's like, why don't you just use the bust? Then Rembrandt's just like, nah, well, you see, it's not true to, Aristotle. And it's like, I'm not true to Aristotle either. It's like, yes, no, but like humanity, your eyes and stuff, you're a real person, bust.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay.
The character of Rembrandt, all in all, in the book kind of seems
like a loser.
Yeah, like a brilliant artist who can't get his shit together, basically.
You know what this book weirdly reminded me of a lot of? The movie The Red Violin.
Oh yeah, I can see that. We follow the history of the violin.
Yeah.
And we don't find out the significance of why it's a red violin until the end.
Although that movie more sort of focuses on what happens after the creation of the violin, whereas this focuses more on the creation itself and the sort of historical significance of what led to its creation.
We do get a bit of its life after.
Yeah. Like with the bidding wars and stuff. And that's mostly where I think a lot of what I'm talking about comes from, with thinking it's similar to that movie.
Although I would say Red Violin is a much more serious movie than
that's true. A lot of, well, I wouldn't say it's quite as laugh out loud funny as Catch-22. You can definitely still tell in all the way this is written that this is Joseph Heller, just in the way that this book is really funny. I think a really good example is just right off the bat how this book starts. I'm actually going to read the entirety of the first chapter to you right now, because it is literally just a half a page. Aristotle, contemplating the bust of Homer, thought often of Socrates while Rembrandt dressed him with paint in a white Renaissance surplice and a medieval black robe and encased him in shadows. Crito, I owe a cock to Asclepius. Plato has Socrates saying after he had swallowed his cup of poison and felt the numbing effects steal up through his groin into his torso and approach his heart. Will you remember to pay the debt? Now, Socrates, of course, did not owe a cock to Asclepius, the god of medicine, and the leather merchant Asclepius, you will find written here, son of the physician Eurymenides, was as baffled as anyone to learn of the bequest from the slave who appeared on his doorstep in the morning with a live rooster in his arms. The authorities were curious also and took him into custody for questioning. They put him to death when he continued to profess his ignorance and would not reveal the code.
That is such an absurd way to start the book. And that's the first but not the only time we hear about this. We'll get more detail on the absurdity of the prosecution of Asclepius, how he basically can't get himself out of this hole because he doesn't know what he's supposed to confess to, is probably actually Socrates making a joke about owing a chicken to a god. Because there is a god named Asclepius, and Athens, this great bastion of democracy, executes this guy for being mistaken for the butt of the joke. Another
thing, though, I realized, fun enough, just rereading that just now, I think it is Aristotle who's like pondering on everything that's happening.
You think the whole history of Athens is what Aristotle is thinking about?
No, it literally says the name of the painting, thought often of Socrates. As the first line of the book. And it's so funny because I was like saying this to you. I was like, man, this book would be a lot better if it was just like structured the way I just realized it is structured the whole time. So actually this book is great.
Well, I guess if it had been a little more obvious about that structure, it could have worked a little better. I think if we were more aware that all of the Athens history was what the painting of Aristotle was thinking about, it makes it clear in that paragraph. I don't think it makes it clear throughout the book.
Yeah.
So I think your critique is still valid, even if it's something that comes out in the first paragraph.
Yeah, but I think the intention is for it to go through the whole book, that we're supposed to think of it that way.
I suppose. But did he as an author succeed in that intention?
Well, I didn't figure that out until just now, so I guess maybe not.
Yeah.
I do think I agree. I think if this book leaned into it more and was like more like clearly just a painting of Aristotle pondering all of this, I think this could have been like, not that this book isn't already really good, because I still like really just enjoy everything that's being discussed about it, but I think it would have brought a focus to it and would have brought a more of an emotional hook to it all. That I think I would have appreciated a lot more.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think one of the things that I didn't love about the book, which we kind of touched on before, was the characterization of Rembrandt. The painting is less two-dimensional than the painter. Like this whole thing about how his students would paint coins on the ground so that he would mistake them for actual coins and try and pick them up, and like all these little jokes about him just caring nothing but money. He doesn't even seem to value the work he does. Made him a kind of unappealing and unsympathetic character.
Yeah, I agree.
I might have liked it more if there was more depth to him. But again, I think might have been intentional on Heller's part. Knowing that we only have these letters and then creating a characterization of him based on that, it's something you have to think about whether or not you can trust that characterization, because we actually have so little history about him.
And I think what makes this sort of dampen that criticism a little and make it not also as bad is that I think the book is definitely, in its focus, is probably more like 60 to 70% Athens stuff, like 20 to 25% this, and then like 5% 1900 stuff. Rembrandt doesn't get as much focus. There's definitely a lot of time still spent on that, and I do agree that it suffers from that. But even when it is focusing on Rembrandt's time, it seems to focus more on the people around Rembrandt too, like Jan 6th.
Yeah.
Which is crazy nowadays that there's a character named that.
Yeah. Well, this is probably Jan, but
yeah, you're probably right. But still, I kept picturing him like, and his wife who died, and their son.
Yeah, and the women he had relationships with after his wife died but never remarried. And then we also get some insight into some of the other paintings he painted.
Yeah.
There's a whole thing about how one painting he did, which was actually 4 canvases stitched together, and how the person who commissioned it from him was furious and complained about this. And then one of his paintings is now known as The Jewish Bride, even though that's not, as far as anyone can know, what it was titled when Rembrandt painted it. And Heller says, "We don't know why it's called this. She doesn't look any more Jewish than you or I." Heller is Jewish. So to not look any more Jewish than me or the Jewish writer of this book, that's a bit of a comment on, like, as a Jewish man has probably spent his life just being really sick of this cliche of how Jewish people all look alike. Like, oh, you can tell by that person's nose that they're Jewish, and all this kind of like racist stereotypes.
But it can also be taken as, with what I was saying though, that's what Aristotle was saying, because it also does mention earlier that the painting of Aristotle, like someone's like, that looks more like a Jewish person than Aristotle. So there's a lot to dissect with this book. And it's like, dang, I need to jump back into it again. And I kind of devoured this book, read it in like only 2 days.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure if I ever like looked at it again and, studied the history more and all of that, there's so much more that there is to appreciate and unravel with this book.
I have to say, one of the things that is great about reading this book now, as opposed to when it came out or when I first read it, is like how easily easy it is to access information. As I was reading this book, it would talk about another painting by Rembrandt, and I could Google it and be like, okay, that's what this painting looks like. Or they would talk about a specific battle, and I was go to the Wikipedia page and read the details about that battle and actually have a sense of the history of all these different things. The first time I read it, I would have had to go to the library to do all those things, so I didn't. If you're interested in history, this book is also just a great sort of jumping off point.
Okay, so based off, I guess, military ranking, how would you rate this?
Well, I guess on a scale of XPFC Wintergreen to General Dreidel, I'm going to have to give it a major.
Well, I think I might go with a major to Coverley.
Sounds good. Yeah, we're both in this about the same ballpark then. With it.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's definitely a great book, and I'm excited to give it another look at some point in the future. It's not as good as Catch-22, Heller's right about that, but it's definitely something where if you're at all interested in the history, give it a read for sure.
So thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment down below.
And all those other things YouTubers tell you to do. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go stuff some crab apples in my cheeks.